All right, thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. Happy to have you with us. A little bit less than a year ago, shortly after former President George H.W. Bush died, his funeral in Washington was the kind of occasion that we only very, very, very rarely see in U.S. politics, right? I mean, there are only so many U.S. presidents. There are only so many ex-presidents alive at any one time, and any one of them passing is always going to be a very, very big deal, let alone one as revered as former President George H.W. Bush. One of the things that was remarkable about his funeral last year were the pictures from the funeral, right? Do you remember this shot, right? Rosalind Carter next to Jimmy Carter, next to Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, next to Michelle Obama and Barack Obama, next to Melania Trump, next to Donald Trump, all there together, vice presidents and their families sitting behind them. I mean, you just don't see that in real life. That's like flipping through a history book, right? Except there they all are on the same page, in the same place, at the same time all together. You never see that. But President Bush's funeral at the National Cathedral was a huge affair. It wasn't just presidents and vice presidents and their families. It was everyone imaginable in U.S. politics. One of the weirder things we have since learned about the attendance at that funeral is that when former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani decided that he would attend that funeral, he brought with him a date, a most unusual date. The Bush family has since pronounced themselves, quote, disappointed to learn that the man who Rudy Giuliani brought to Poppy Bush's funeral at the National Cathedral in Washington was Lev Parnas. Lev Parnas, now famous as one of Rudy Giuliani's two associates, who was just last week arrested at Dulles Airport with a one-way ticket out of this country. He and three other men have been charged with a sprawling campaign finance scheme that prosecutors say was designed, among other things, to funnel illegal foreign donations to the president's reelection effort and to a number of different Republican campaigns. Well, since those arrests, the picture that has unfolded about Mr. Parnas, about Rudy Giuliani's date for the Poppy Bush funeral, it's sort of, started bad, but it's gotten very dark very fast. Here, for example, is Ben Schreckinger and Darren Samuelson writing for Politico.com. Quote, on October 25th, 2008, the owner of a property in Florida in which Lev Parnas had been living told Parnas he needed to leave. When the men began to argue and the owner told Parnas he would call the police, Parnas told the man, quote, if you call the cops, they're not going to find you, ever. That's according to a petition for a restraining order that was subsequently filed in court in South Florida. That restraining order petition was obtained by these Politico reporters. According to further court filings, despite that they will never find you ever threat, 3 days later, quote, the men met again to discuss the matter further. According to the restraining order petition, this time it went even worse. Quote, Lev Parnas held a gun to the man's head and said, this is my last warning to you. He then, according to the court filing, got into his car, a dark blue Porsche, and he drove off. We know from another court motion obtained by Politico that soon thereafter, on Halloween night, police found Mr. Parnas and seized at least 3 guns from him, including a .40 caliber Glock, a 9mm semi-automatic pistol, and a .38 revolver. So now in what is turning out to be sort of the criminal prosecution offshoot to the ongoing impeachment proceedings against President Trump, I mean, some of the mystery here, some of the weirdness here is finally starting to come into focus after a week or so of starting to figure out who this cast of characters is. I mean, first, you should know that this particular guy, the one who went to the George H.W. Bush funeral as the guest of Rudy Giuliani, the guy with the gun to the head restraining order filings in Florida, he's the only one of these 4 guys who were charged in this criminal case this past week who apparently has not made bail. Interesting. His friend Igor did. Igor is out on $1 million bail. After some initial confusion as to the bail status of these guys, we actually talked with the reporter who told us that with her own eyes, she saw Igor walk under his own power out of a federal courthouse with his lawyers. So we're pretty confident that Igor was ultimately bailed on $1 million bail. We also know from the arraignment of the other two defendants in this case, yesterday in Federal District Court in New York, that the other two defendants in this case have also made bail. The guy who was arrested in San Francisco, like Igor, he was released on $1 million bail. The guy who was at large for several days after the indictment was unsealed, who was only eventually arrested just a couple of days ago after arriving on an overseas flight at JFK Airport, he too is out on bail, although his bail was set lower. It was set at $250,000. We actually got the transcript of their arraignment today, and we can see from the transcript of the arraignment that the judge hearing the case, he confirms the bail arrangements for all of these defendants. The judge then, in his interactions with the prosecutors here, gives us another couple of interesting pieces of information about this case that we didn't previously have. First of all, the judge makes clear that this might be a case that is a little bit sprawling. I mean, soon after an arraignment like this, it's incumbent upon the prosecutors basically to share with the defendants and their lawyers, to share with the other side the evidence that prosecutors are going to use to try to prove their case against these defendants. It's a process called discovery. It's part of a fair trial. You get to see what the government has against you. Well, in the arraignment in federal court yesterday afternoon, prosecutors told the judge that in this case, the discovery is going to be a lot. So much so that it's going to take a long time for them just to hand it all over. From the transcript, the judge says, quote, "Before we address scheduling of further proceedings, I'd just like to ask counsel for the government if they could briefly describe the categories and volume of discovery to be produced." The prosecutor says, "Yes, Your Honor." So the discovery in this case is fairly voluminous. It includes approximately 10 search warrant applications and records obtained pursuant to search warrants for over 10 email accounts, which encompass multiple gigabytes of electronic data. The discovery will also include financial records for more than 50 bank accounts. Again, according to the prosecutor, quote, "fairly voluminous an amount," as well as records from a number of third parties that either have been produced or are continuing to be produced. So, Your Honor, the government's intention is to begin to produce discovery on a rolling basis. I mean, I know it is 4 guys who are charged in this indictment, but more than 50 bank accounts? Prosecutors also made clear, under further questioning from the judge, that it seems like this is not over. That this investigation is not done. The judge says, quote, to the prosecutor, "Do you anticipate any superseding indictments at this point?" Meaning further indictments of these 4 defendants. Prosecutor says, "Your Honor, I think it is fair to characterize the government's investigation as ongoing, but no decision about any type of additional charges has been made." So, I mean, we know that the government's case, prosecutor's case, is ongoing here because since these guys were all indicted, we know that at least one former Republican congressman to whom they allegedly steered illegal foreign campaign contributions, former Texas Republican Congressman Pete Sessions, has received a subpoena from the same grand jury that indicted these guys. So because the grand jury is still handing out subpoenas, we know this investigation is ongoing and there's the possibility of further charges against either the guys who have already been charged or against additional defendants. But now, from the transcript, we've got it here from the prosecutor's mouth as well. Your Honor, I think it is fair to characterize the government's investigation as ongoing. In this criminal case, though, that again appears to be the sort of criminal prosecution that is adjacent to and connected to the ongoing impeachment proceedings against the president, I find it interesting that of the 4 guys who were charged, only one of them appears to still be in prison and not bailed out. I mean, he's the one on the far left here. He's the one who has in his public record this holding a gun to the guy's head stuff from Florida. There's also been extensive public reporting on the number of outstanding civil fraud suits that he appears to have been running from for some time. If you look up the public record of his past experience as a stockbroker, you also find that he's been associated with at least 3 financial firms that have been shut down by financial regulators, including one that later surfaced in a lurid mob-connected stock scheme that involved senior members of the Colombo crime family. Tell me again how he ended up as Rudy Giuliani's date at Poppy Bush's funeral? Tell me also how he ended up having dinner at the White House with the sitting president of the United States. Tell me again why he's got all of these different pictures of himself with the sitting president of the United States. I mean, it's almost more unnerving that in addition to the pictures of himself with the president, we've also got a picture of him with the president's eldest son. Right? The other guy besides his co-defendant on the far right side of this picture and the president's son on the far left side of this picture, the other guy in this picture is a man who, at the time this picture was taken, was running the main super PAC that is supporting President Trump's re-election efforts. That's a super PAC called America First, which itself is named in these felony allegations from federal prosecutors about these illegal foreign campaign donations. We're going to have more on that aspect of this case coming up in just a moment. ProPublica has just published some eye-popping new stuff about that part of the president's re-election effort and how that might factor in here. But on Capitol Hill in Washington, right? I mean, the impeachment part of this, the impeachment thing is obviously not going very well for the president. There's no clear sense as to who is quarterbacking the White House's defense for the impeachment proceedings. There have been some insinuations over the last week or two that maybe it was White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney who was running the defense to the impeachment. Whether or not that was true before yesterday, it's definitely not true now. Not after Mr. Mulvaney strode to the White House podium and cheerfully admitted that not only did, the president definitely submit help from a foreign government to use against the Democrats, but of course there was some pressure behind it and a little trading. Call it quid pro quo, call it whatever you want, just get over it. White House Chief of Staff cheerfully, even boisterously admitting yesterday that, military aid was withheld in exchange for these demands from the president for domestic political help against his opponents. That performance by the White House Chief of Staff yesterday, I mean, we're already seeing it sort of scrambled Republicans' defense of the president's behavior, right? That cheerful admission from him that, there was a quid pro quo. That has undermined the chief defense of the president's actions from multiple Republicans in Congress. And I think they'll be paying for that politically for a very long time. The other thing, though, that Mick Mulvaney was set out to announce yesterday was the plan by the administration to steer what amounts to a gigantic government contract to the president's golf property in Florida, which is called Doral. We're going to talk about that a little later on tonight in the context of the impeachment inquiry, because it's starting to look like that itself could end up being an additional standalone article of impeachment against President Trump. Again, that is all still to come just this hour. It's Friday, right? So the news it's like pureeing something in a blender with no lid on. It's just happening. We'll get to everything, I swear.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.